Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. War fighting, Syria. The President of the United States in these last days commenting about Syria. The President speaking to an observation that his reluctance to get involved in the Syrian civil war is a success because now there are peace negotiations. Now Russia has enforced its strategy to the west of Syria, and the Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, Islamic State combination is momentarily stalemated, so that Syria has a moment here to resolve itself peacefully, says the President of the United States. The facts, however, are sturdy and relentless. And I begin with my Foundation for the Defense of Democracy Long War Journal reporters, Bill Roggio and Tom Jocelyn, to comment on Syria, the details about Al-Qaeda, which is called Al-Nusra Front in Syria. Gentlemen, a very good evening to you. Bill, I begin with you. Ahmed Salama Mabruk. Who is he, and why has he joined the Al-Nusra Front? Good evening to you, Bill.
Good evening, John. Yes, Mabruk, he's a veteran Egyptian jihadist. He has worked for Al-Qaeda's Emir Ayman al-Zawahiri. He's been working with jihadists since the early 1980s. Was arrested after the assassination of the Egyptian president back then. He has served as an aide to Zawahiri, and he's a very senior Al-Qaeda leader who has worked with them for decades, and now we're finding out, not shocking, because Tom Jocelyn has reported on this, I believe it was about a year ago, that he's showing up in the Al-Nusra Front's propaganda. He's been sent to Syria, where he's now serving as a senior leader. Tom, I believes he is a member of the Shura Council, which is their executive council, and he's leading the path for the group. He's just another top Al-Qaeda leader who we're finding out has been sent over to Syria to help establish the jihad there. And, look, Syria is extremely important to Al-Qaeda, and I think they've had a very effective strategy there of establishing key leadership cell there, as well as ingratiating themselves and ingraining themselves within the Syrian insurgency, and Mabruk is a key character in doing all of this.
The original group, was Egyptian Islamic Jihad. It was that group that wed with Al-Qaeda right before the attack on the United States of America. That what was important. Those two groups, Zawahiri and bin Laden, getting together. Tom, a very good evening to you. Egyptian Islamic Jihad. What does this mean about Al-Qaeda's intentions in Syria? Does this give weight, or is this just a graybeard that they've sent off for retirement somewhere in the Aleppo province? Good evening to you, Tom.
Well, good evening, John. Well, I think this is more important than just a graybeard that's operating in Syria. This is a guy who, according to published reports back in the 1990s when he was tried in Egypt, that he in fact actually had expertise in chemical weapons and was actually pursuing chemical weapons on behalf of Al-Qaeda when he was detained in 1998 in Azerbaijan. And in fact, he was considered so important at the time that the CIA led an international manhunt to track him down in Azerbaijan. He was rendered to Egypt, where he stood trial. And during that trial, all sorts of details about the Egyptian Islamic Jihad and Al-Qaeda came out, really in the press, explaining how this all worked. And this guy was considered very key at the time. He was considered to be the right-hand man to Ayman al-Zawahiri, who was the current leader of Al-Qaeda. Mabruk was also considered a guy who had international operational expertise. He basically kept the Rolodex for Zawahiri of operatives around the globe, making sure that everybody got where they needed to go and basically were doing their jobs. And he's somebody who was considered really dedicated to the cause all the way back, as Bill said, to the early 1980s, because this is a guy who, after the assassination of Anwar Sadat, he was arrested by the Egyptians, imprisoned for 7 years, and made his way to Afghanistan, where, according to some accounts, he pledged allegiance to Osama bin Laden. So this is a guy who really has the sort of cachet in the jihadist world that the jihadists like for somebody who can basically lead jihadists, lead Al-Qaeda's forces, command them, and has their respect.
Bill, Al-Qaeda al-Nusra in Syria. You and Tom have filed a an analysis of the statement by Abu Muhammad al-Julani. Who is it? Who is that? And what is the statement, Bill?
Yes, Julani is al-Qaeda's emir for Syria, for the al-Nusra Front. Again, this was established back at the very beginning of the Syrian insurgency. It was actually established by what is now the Islamic State, but we had the split between the two. Julani is recently released a tape where he basically lays out al-Qaeda's strategy 5 years into the Syrian revolution. He's basically explaining that while there is some resistance to the al-Nusra Front, some pockets of resistance is basically how he describes it. He says that the al-Nusra Front is effectively ingraining itself within the Syrian insurgency. It's been very successful, and we've seen this because the al-Nusra Front has fought with most of the either jihadist groups or even just free Syrian army groups will fight alongside the al-Nusra Front and get involved in its operations rooms. And Julani's also talks about how the West basically has failed inside of Syria, that it has no plan, it has no real strategy inside Syria because it has no real partners to work with, and that also is evidence. Tom's done fascinating reporting on this as well, on how various free Syrian army groups and and other independent units, while at times they'll either work alongside the U.S. or receive U.S. weapons, but they'll also cooperate with the al-Nusra Front. The Nusra Front either winds up taking their weapons or overrunning these groups and doing, taking them over. So Julani has you hate to give them credit, but you have to give credit where credit is due. There's a lot of accuracy in his statement that he recently issued.
I read just a portion of Julani's statement. This is the boss of al-Nusra in Syria. For we are from the people of al-Sham, and al-Sham is from us. Nothing can separate us from its people except death, Allah willing. Tom, al-Nusra, this statement makes it look like as if they are confident. Are they? Is this accurate?
Confident. I mean, the thing here to keep in mind is that the Nusra Front is basically, you can think about them going back to the communist days as sort of a third world paramilitary revolutionary force. Essentially what they want to do and what they have done is sort of inculcate their ideology within the Syrian population. So they're using the war against the Assad regime, the war with the Assad regime, to basically convert more and more Sunni people in Syria to their cause. And that's what's very dangerous about what they're doing. It's a very different model from the Islamic State. The Islamic State has a top-down authoritarian model where they basically say, we're in charge, we're here, and the caliphate is the way, and that's it. And they've had success doing that, the Islamic State has. But al-Qaeda has basically the exact opposite model. They have a bottom-up revolutionary model where what they're trying to do is win and build popular support for their cause. And this is something that gives us a lot of worry going forward because Syria really is one of the best breeding grounds for this model of sort of popular revolutionary jihadism. And on Nusra Front and al-Qaeda, they're making it work.
Do you see in this, Tom, any consideration of the Russians and their success, or is this just ignoring all that is something that will pass?
Well, the Russians have had some success. I mean, to put this all in perspective, the Russians intervened. The real reason why the Russians intervened is because the al-Qaeda-led coalition, Jaish al-Fatah, which is known as the Army of Conquest, which al-Qaeda on Nusra Front formed in early 2015, had tremendous success capturing the northwestern province of Idlib and was pushing both to the coast in Latakia, which is a coastal stronghold for the Assad regime, and was also trying to push its way south, basically down through the plain south of Idlib, right into the heart of basically the operations of the Assad regime. And the Russians intervened because as this coalition that was led by al-Qaeda was gaining steam and capturing territory, they realized that Putin realized that if he was going to preserve the Assad regime, they needed to intervene. Now, you've seen a lot of things in the press talking about how Putin and the Assad regime were really going after the quote-unquote moderate rebels. Well, the problem in Syria is that it's very hard to identify who is exactly moderate, and the organizations that are often called moderate are actually working with al-Qaeda a lot of times. And really what this was all about was that al-Qaeda had figured out how to pool the resources of various different groups, including those that didn't share its entire ideology, to really take the fight to the Assad regime. So the Russians intervened, they stopped this advance. Now the game is on to see whether or not the Al-Qaeda-led coalitions can sort of start advancing once again.
Gentlemen, we're going to turn to other battlefields, but before we leave Syria, your opinion, Bill, in Syria, is this civil war winding down? Are the peace negotiations going to resolve the conflict, or is this battle growing?
No, absolutely not. This is not winding down at all. I don't think the peace negotiations are having any real impact. The real players on the battlefield, Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra Front and its allies, and then the Islamic State on the other side, they're the ones that are really going to dictate the pace of the fighting, and that's exactly what's happening. So you might have some independent, so-called moderate groups that are participating in peace negotiations, but the fighting that matters is being conducted by Al-Qaeda and its allies or the Islamic State.
And Tom, the 45th President of the United States, will inherit a Syrian civil war growing, and does this mean that it'll grow into the neighboring countries?
Yeah, I mean, I think the conflict has already grown into the neighboring countries. You already have terrorist attacks in Turkey, operations in Turkey. You have bombings in Lebanon and plots in Jordan. You have there's an interconnectivity between what's going on in Syria and countries really all throughout the Levant, the Middle East, and into North Africa. So this is really a complex problem that the new president will definitely inherit.
Tom, Jocelyn, Bill Roggio of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. They keep the Long War Journal. Al-Qaeda in Syria. Boasting. I'm John Batchelor.